Jumbo, welcome.
Jumbo.
We're so glad that you're joining us. This is Operation Power, a voice for Black radical politics and revolutionary change. We're here on Black Power Media Reloaded, and we're so glad and pleased to be a part of this great family. My name is Inez Barron, and I'm the co-host along with my husband, the bold, the outspoken, the indomitable, the one and only unbought and unbossed
Charles Barron. And as I say each and every week, it is a humbling honor for me to be next to this stunningly beautiful, intellectually brilliant wife of mine for 43 years, Inez Barron.
Thank you so much. We've got an exciting program for you today, and it's called We Fought Back, African People's Resistance to Slavery and Colonialism. And we've got a great guest, Dr. Sam Anderson. We'll be hearing from him shortly. And we know that you're going to get a lot of information and be enlightened by what it is that we're going to share with you today. But first, we want to say that as an African people, we believe that we are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. We believe that they have given us the baton and wanting us to move forward. We recognize their sacrifices, their contributions, and we know there are many whose names we don't even know, but that they contributed in their own way to moving us forward. So we do have a libation video, and we're going to ask our engineer, Brother Kiru Gichuru, if he would play that for us at this time.
Without a libation. And so for this very important presentation, we begin by the pouring of libation. We pour libation first to our first ancestor, to that hidden one who, though hidden, manifests in all things as all things, that God-goddess idea in the universe by any and all names. To our first ancestor, we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the first people on this planet, mothers and fathers of all mankind, flashpoint of the human family. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because they were the ones who first gave birth to the idea of civilization, knew we would need a form of governance, and they nurtured that idea along the Nile until it reached its zenith in Kemet. There they built these gigantic monuments as evidence of that great civilization, and they carved instructions on the walls of temples and tombs for us, so we would never forget. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to our ancestors because over time they put together all the tenets of civilization and they took those ideas and left the continent. They were the people of the first Exodus. They left Africa and went all over the world and peopled the world. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. We pour libation too to our ancestors because they did not sit on their laurels. They continued to improve, continued to evolve, and at each point of evolution, they again would leave the continent and settle and resettle the planet. They met themselves coming and going. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to those ancestors because over time, they found themselves the object of a forced exodus when they were kidnapped, shackled, cargoed, shipped out of Africa and enslaved in diasporas around the world. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to the ancestors left at home, the very young, the aged, the infirm, left to reinvent themselves, depleted of us, human resources. But they were enjoined by us in the diasporas, both objects of a global myopia that ruptured the soul of a people as it ravaged a continent. To those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to those ancestors because over time they began to remember who and what they were. Because no matter where they had been dropped off, they still retained bits and pieces of who and what they were. They retained that African core that described them. They began to remember bits and pieces of a song. They began to remember lines from a rhythm. They began to remember dances that they did in ancient times. They began to remember those ancient drum beats that they now beat out on bare skin. And so to those ancestors we pour libation, Ashe. Pour libation too to them because they then began to teach each other. They began to resurrect and reconstruct that history and that culture. They became the new Africans wherever they were. They became the new teachers, preachers, archaeologists, the new singers, dancers, the new drummers, the new Jaliyah. They reconstructed that history and our culture and became new Africans everywhere. So to those ancestors, we pour libation. I shave. Pour libation to those ancestors because they are the ones who pass that information on to us. And so we pour libation to those of you who will watch this presentation, those of you who are the recipients of that pieced together history, of that reconstructed culture. To you, we pour libation. Ashe.
Asheo. Thank you so much. Once again, this is Operation Power, a voice for Black radical politics and revolutionary change. And we just have a brief video that we want to share with you. It talks a little about Operation Power, who we are, what we have accomplished so far, and what we're doing here in the East New York community in particular.
Operation Power stands for people organizing and working for empowerment and respect.
Operation Power is a grassroots social justice organization founded by local community stakeholders, which includes activists, organizers, and leaders who understand that the system as it is currently structured is destroying us and our communities.
The system, the capitalist system, one that promotes human greed over human need, one that promotes profit over people, needs to be dismantled. These local community organizers recognize capitalism needs to be destroyed and replaced with socialism.
Operation Power was founded in 1997 with the understanding that uprooting capitalism needs to begin locally. Operation Power understood that our communities are the perfect vehicle to dismantle this parasitic capitalist system brick by brick, and the economic, political, and cultural institutions and other systems in place in our local community infrastructure. Whether it's the local school board, community board, city council, state assembly, all represents mechanisms to control the destiny of our people.
Thank you so much. We do want to also highlight some books that are germane to what we in Operation Power have done. And the first one is none other than Speaking Truth to Power, written by Charles Barron. And it is a collection of articles and essays that have been written over the years. And the second one is It's Not You, It's Capitalism, Why It's Time to Break Up and How to Move On. And this one is both a primer and a deep analysis of what's going on now in this capitalist country. The third, fourth, and fifth are a trilogy. The first one in the trilogy is called Black Rising. It's a novel written by Kevin Barron, and it is a page turner. Pick it up. Be sure you have time to finish it because you're going to want to get to the end. The second one of the trilogy is Black Rising, Home and Abroad. It is the second in the series, continuing information and the plot of the first one. And the third one is called The Threat, also by Kevin Barron. So we do invite you to get these three books. You can get them online through Barnes and Noble. Well, here we are on our topic. Charles Barron, you want to get us introduced?
Let's get busy. Well, we wanted to do this. We fought back because too often when we go into our history, it's always a history of oppression and repression. It's always a history of how the white man has done so much harm to us, and they have. And it's usually people celebrate Black history during February. Well, not us. Every day is Black history. We're not going to be relegated to the coldest and shortest month of the year to acknowledge and celebrate our history. So today, we're doing one called We Fought Back, African Resistance, African Power, African Fight, African Revolutions, African Rebellions. We fought back In the South, we fought back on the shores of Africa. So I want to show you a little clip, and then Dr. Sam Anderson is going to bring it home in the last 30, 40 minutes. For Kru, could you put up the PowerPoint presentation? So it's We Fought Back, African Resistance and Revolutions. We say from the shores of Africa to the city of Ferguson. Next. Wanted to talk about the African Holocaust. Nothing has been greater. We often talked about the transatlantic slave trade. We call it the transatlantic slave raid. They raided Africa. And then very seldom talked about is the Arab slave raid, because they raided Africa. And when you look at the transatlantic slave raid, yes, some African chiefs sold us into slavery for gunpowder or whatever to Europeans. We always have sellouts in our history, even to this very day. And they didn't realize it was the kind of slavery that they were used to engaging in after they conquered a tribe or a clan and through war. But the majority of us were stolen, were raided, were victims of the slave raid. So the transatlantic slave raid from 1441 to 1800, 12 to 20 million Africans were stolen, the ones that lived. Another 60 to 80 million Africans, they say, died during the Middle Passage journey or died when the slave ships came inshore and inland and killed a lot of Africans who resisted and fought back. How many Africans died on the plantations in the Americas and the West Indies? That's another large number. Then you had the Arab slave raid, 650 to 1900. 10 to 18 million Africans were stolen and lived, and they went to the Middle East area, all the area where Iraq is and where the so-called Middle East is. They say 50 to 100 million Africans died during that period. And how many died after they got into slavery in the Middle East? So if you're talking about a Holocaust, there's nothing greater than the African Holocaust. Next. There were hundreds of successful mutinies during the Middle Passage, the Ma'afa, where ships were turned back to Africa. They don't talk about that. They may talk about a couple like Sinkay on the Amistad in 1839, where they were tricked into, after the mutiny, they went on to navigate them, the white captains did, to Long Island, and they got recaptured and went into court, and John Quincy Adams, or John Adams, a white man, rescued them and sent them home. But there was like hundreds of mutinies where they actually took over the ships, killed all of the navigators, all of the white crew, and turned the ships back to Africa. They don't talk about those, but there are countless lists of those mutinies that occurred successfully. Next. The rebellion of 1526 in the Petee River in South Carolina was the first revolt in American history. A Spanish colony was established with enslaved Africans. About 120 enslaved Africans came from the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti, and what's the Dominican Republic. It was called Hispaniola then, and the Spaniards brought 120 Africans to the Petee River area in South Carolina. However, the Africans hooked up with the indigenous people, the so-called Indians, and they whipped them. They beat them so badly that they were kowtowing back to Hispaniola, and many of them died on the trip back. So yes, the English came in 1619 to Georgetown, Virginia, but in 1526 in the Petee River, that was the first established Spanish colony where enslaved Africans successfully beat their enslavers and sent them back to Hispaniola. Next. Gaspar Yanger and the successful rebellion of enslaved Africans in Veracruz, Mexico in 1609. Rather than me tell you about that, I have a little clip that we want to play, and you'll hear for yourself. Caspar Yenger.
Gaspar Yenger was brought to Mexico/New Spain on a slave ship. After having been kidnapped from Africa and enslaved, Yenger and his followers overthrew his captors and staged a successful rebellion. He became the first African Middle Passage rebel to win a fight against his Spanish captors, and he granted freedom and land for his people. In what is now Veracruz, the southern eastern coast of Mexico, Yenger and a group of enslaved Africans escaped. In 1570s, Gaspar Yenger overpowered the colonizers and completely took over the plantation of Nuestra Señora de la Concepción. Between 1570 and 1609, Yenger led his followers into the mountains located in the vicinity of Paco de Orzabala, or the Star Mountain, which is the highest mountain in Mexico. At that time, it was known as New Spain.
See, that was Caspar Yenger, and man, he was a powerful, powerful brother. Stayed in there for 30 years. His son took over, and even though Caspar Yenger had some kind of agreement with the Mexicans, they said, listen, we tried to beat you, but we couldn't. So if you leave us alone and don't take any more of our enslaved Africans, we will leave you alone in what they call a maroon village and a maroon colony in the mountains. Caspar agreed, but his son didn't. So his son continued the struggle. Next. Nanny of the Maroons in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica. She is a national hero or heroine, depending upon how language you want to use, but she's a national hero in Jamaica. And she had a military genius. She was courageous and led a victorious battle for her people to be freed from enslavement. And we have a little clip on Nanny.
Of the Maroons, a remarkable figure in Jamaican history. Born around 1686 in what is now Ghana, West Africa, Nanny became a symbol of resistance against British colonial forces in Jamaica. As a leader of the Windward Maroons, Nanny's military prowess and spiritual practices were key to their successful resistance during the First Maroon War. Nanny pioneered the use of the abeng for long-range communication, mastered camouflage techniques, and set clever ambushes to defeat the British. Her efforts led to the signing of a peace treaty in 1740, granting freedom and land to her people. Today, Nanny is celebrated as Jamaica's only female national hero, an enduring symbol of the indomitable spirit and fight for freedom. And that's why you should learn about
Nanny of the Maroons, powerful sister. Reminds me of Queen Nzinga in Angola, who took on the Portuguese and made them carry her and kowtow to her. We have some powerful sisters. Next. The Stono Rebellion in South Carolina in 1739. Early on the morning of Sunday, September 9th, 1739, 20 Black South Carolinians met near the Stono River, approximately 20 miles southwest of Charlestown. At Stono's Bridge, they took guns and powder from the Hutchinson store and killed the 2 storekeepers they found there, and went on to liberate other Africans on plantations before the rebellion was suppressed. They went all through the South, declaring their freedom, but once again, sellout Negroes, traitors, warned the other slave owners that they were coming, and they were finally suppressed. That's the Stono Rebellion. Next. The revolt in New Orleans, Louisiana. In 1804, the enslaved black people of Haiti overthrew the French rule and ended slavery on the island nation of Haiti. Some say the first revolution, successful revolution in the Western Hemisphere. The French planters left their sugar plantations on the island and fled to New Orleans. So the enslavers who were defeated in Haiti came to New Orleans. With them, some of their personal slaves, bringing enslaved African, bringing these Black enslaved Africans from Haiti, brought with them a powerful message, the story of a successful revolt by the enslaved Africans in Haiti. So, because they were familiar with that victory, on January 8th, 1811, a slave revolt led by Charles Dessalines swept by a white plantation owner. The insurrection began at the plantation of Manuel Andre in the St. John's Baptist Parish. Slaves attacked Andre, wounded him, seizing weapons that could be found, and they went all through the South talking about liberté, liberté, and they were on their way to take over New Orleans, because what they wanted to do is establish a Black state, as they did in Haiti, a liberated Black state. And they got on the front door of New Orleans. Here comes the sellout Negroes, that they were sold out by their own people, and that slave revolt was ended. Next. Madison, Washington. This is one of the most profound stories in slave revolt history. Madison, Washington freed himself, and he went to Canada. While he was in Canada in 1839, he got wind and word of the Amistad Cinque and the Amistad slave revolt in 1839, and he said, I want to go back to America, and I'm going to free my wife who was enslaved in America. So he came back, and he was recaptured and put into slavery on the same boat she was on, the slave boat Creole, and they were bound toward New Orleans. They made him the cook. What a mistake, because he had to have knives and other kinds of equipment to scrape the fish and clean the fish. So when everybody was asleep one night, Madison, Washington decided to get 18 to 19 of his brothers weapons from the kitchen, and they took over the ship, and they guided it back to the British-controlled island of Bahamas. And then the British negotiated with him because they had abolished slavery and they were fighting the Americans, and he was able to liberate himself and his wife, and they went back to Africa. Madison, Washington. Next. So I just want you all to be aware of meritorious manumission. In Virginia during the enslavement period, there was a law passed titled the Meritorious Manumission Act of 1710. It was the legal act of freeing an enslaved African for good deeds, as defined by the national public policy, and could be granted to an enslaved African who saved the life of a white racist colonial enslaver or his property, invented something from which the white colonial enslaver could make a profit, or snitched on a fellow enslaved African or of the rebellion that was being planned. See, we have Black faces in high places, and that doesn't mean Black power or Black liberation, especially since they were meritoriously manumissioned by the white power structure of today. We don't want to change in the complexion of leadership only. We want to change in the direction of leadership. We don't want personality changes. We want policy changes. And finally, we don't want symbolic changes. We want radical systemic changes. Remember, our struggle may be long, but guess what? The victory is certain. Unfortunately, we still got some notoriously manumission Negroes running around here today doing the white man's bidding and being rewarded for their good deeds to suppress our liberation movement.
Thank you.
That's it for me. The Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army was a part of that liberation process too. Inez, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to get to our guest now. Our guest is none other than Dr. Sam Anderson. He is an alum from Lincoln University. He's a former member of SNCC, and the Black Panther Party. He was very much engaged in the civil rights struggle and the Black liberation struggle, and also is involved in fighting anti-colonialism and anti-apartheid, and led solidarity and was involved in solidarity for Cuba, for Palestine, and for Grenada. He is a retired math and Black history professor in colleges and universities in the New York metropolitan area. And he's a member of the National Black Unity Forum, as well as the New York, New Jersey Cuba C, and the National Black Education Agenda, and the New York Coalition to Finally End Mayoral Control. And he is the author of the book that's a part of what we're talking about today, talking about
the Black
Holocaust for Beginners.
So here we are. And he is the husband of Dr. Rosemary Mealy, who was on our program last week. Dr. Anderson, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, sister and brother. Thank you very much, my long-term comrades in struggle. Yes, it's great. It was. I'm very happy to be part of this program tonight. We hope that this will inspire the younger generation to take up the intellectual and activists and organizing tasks to move our struggle further. Sankofa means we look to the past to struggle better in the future and present, and it's very, very important. When I was young, I had no idea that until certain things happened to me when I was a student at Lincoln University. Unbelievable convergence of knowledge at that campus. I had no idea, for example, that Kwame Nkrumah was a Lincoln University student.
Right.
I had no idea that Azikiwe, the first president of Nigeria, was a student at Lincoln University. I had no idea that Thurgood Marshall was there. I had no idea that Langston Hughes was there. You know, it was like mind blowing.
Yeah.
But that drove me into going into the library at Lincoln, which was very similar to the Schomburg. And in that library, I saw for the first time in my life 19th century Black people writing about the struggle to be free. And in that, I saw at its core was resistance, not begging as the white folks would put medallions of, oh Lord, make us free, you know, that kind of, no. And it was, and this is what I'm talking about now, in my experience, was 1962 to 1966 at Lincoln University. And in that, I began to realize that at its core, the history of the United States was and is shaped by the levels of resistance of Black people to the capitalist system. That's the essence of that, right? That all of those writings, all you know, that are found there and at the Schomburg and many other places across the country where there are a Black repository of intellectual work. That's it. We resisted.
Yes.
Capitalism changed every single time. And but I want to go back before the United States into this whole concept of slavery in Africa before the Europeans came. The white folks defined that history. What we have to understand is indentured servitude is not chattel slavery.
Correct.
what we have to understand is that indentured servitude predates chattel slavery.
Mhm.
Chattel slavery is a result of the development of capitalism. And the development of capitalism in that period of the middle 1400s to the 1600s, what that meant was, well, to the 1700s also, what that meant was, if you were black, if you were born from an African woman's womb, you were automatically capital. Indentured servitude did not have that as its foundation. So that when we look at the Arab world and we look at the royalty in many of these places, you see black people up there in that royalty. Why? Because if the indentured servant was a woman who gave birth to a child that was the son of the house of the father of the house, that son or daughter became part of the family automatically. But European capitalism said no way possible. No. You know, so like with Jefferson, right? You know, they would, you know, his children were not part of that family, even though he acknowledged that they existed, but they were not part of that. But anyway, what I want to make sure that other people understand is, when European scholars and some Negro scholars try to conflate slavery in such a way that there was quote unquote Arab slavery and it's the same as European slavery. No. We have to start with indentured servitude and chattel slavery, right? Capitalism is the only form of slavery that or indentured servitude that creates slavery where the African woman's womb is capital. She's capital, producing capital, and her womb is capital. That is key to understanding that is the key to understanding the development of capitalism. The other thing I want to point out is in terms of resistance in the Western Hemisphere is piracy. Most people don't realize that by the 17th and 18th century, the vast majority of pirates were black. They were black folk, right? And how did that happen? Well, we will in your introduction, you mentioned Veracruz, right? And when you look at Veracruz on the map, it's on the coast of the Caribbean, and the Garifuna people, right, were people of African descent who were not enslaved, right? Along that long coast from Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, all the way down Panama. And so the Garifuna people were instrumental in finding ways to interrupt the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. And they over decades created this whole elaborate piracy network to free Africans who were enslaved on slave ships. And to point that out, there was a narrative, and it's also in the Atlantic too. There was a narrative written by some white folks in terms of seeing the Amistad. They were out on the Atlantic Ocean, and they saw these white people who were, on an excursion, having fun on on the Atlantic saw the Amistad, and when they saw the black people commanding the Amistad off of the Carolinas, they said, "Oh, those are pirates, and let's move away from them." Okay, so piracy was redefined by Hollywood, like Hollywood redefined cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know, no white person would be labeled cowboy. They would be called cattlemen. The 19th century, you know, cowboy was black. Okay, because he was a boy in terms of white folks. All right, so you know, all of those kind of things we need to understand about how the levels of resistance by black people have been redefined or erased. And one last thing I want to point out, it's two things. One is the in Brazil, the most powerful transformation of Brazil was Quilombo.
Quilombo, that's right.
Right. The free Brazilians, by the tens of thousands of Africans running away, they defined Brazil in the 19th century, in the 18th century, and the 19th century. They defined what Brazil was about, right? Because if they were able to take people away from working the fields in the Portuguese colonial reality, they defined the economic reality, and that's what happened. And so we need to understand, black people, wherever we landed, reluctantly landed, we fought back, right? And you know, in Cuba, there was a resistance like Nani. In Jamaica, we have Carlotta in Cuba, right? Who was a enslaved African woman who fiercely fought, redefined the relationship between the Spanish colonial reality and the Cuban reality, right? And so she was an important figure. It was only after the Cuban Revolution that she was brought up to be the hero that she was, right? All the times before, no, she didn't exist, right? It didn't exist at all. So, our resistance in the United States, for example, was also erased. In 1969, I met a brother who was doing research at the Library of Congress on resistance, on black resistance, and he came across a group of brothers after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, to fight against the Klan. You know, we often felt that we didn't fight the Klan, but he found a group of brothers, clandestine group of brothers, called the Red String Guard. They would wear red strings on their wrists to identify themselves in this secret organization in the South. And they would, wherever there was a Klan violence, they would find a way of countering that by killing some white guy. Right? It just unknown. So I ran into him. He said, you know, I was at my final point in trying to get additional information about this in the Library of Congress, and he said, when I went to the Library of Congress that day, they said, oh no, that's now in the Pentagon.
Mm.
They took, because keep in mind that we're talking about 1969, you know, the height of one of the height of the Black liberation movement and so forth. So white folks in leadership said, we can't have this information in public. So he couldn't get it. But he years later, I was in St. Simon's Island, which is one of the Georgia Sea Islands. And there was a cultural performance of ring shout, you know, the ring shout, right? It's a African / Christian amalgamation of dance and praise, a praise dance kind of thing, right? Out of the 18th and 19th century in the South. And afterwards, I talked to, and these are now being done usually by elder brothers and sisters. I talked to the brother, one of the brothers there, and I asked him, because he was from South Carolina, and I asked him, I said, have you ever heard of the Red String Guard? And he looked at me and said, nothing. So I said, okay, I understand, right? And the same thing when we look at the African Blood Brotherhood in the 19th century, early 20th century. The formation of the African Blood Brotherhood coming primarily out of the New York City, Pittsburgh, other parts of upstate New York, bringing together these mainly brothers at that time in this group. They were a semi-clandestine organization dedicated to fighting the Klan in the North, right? Fighting racism in the North, physically armed, ready to defend the community. And the African Blood Brotherhood was also a Pan-African united front, because the brothers and sisters who joined it were not only African Americans who were born in the United States, but they were Africans who were born in the Caribbean, and a handful of them who came over, migrated from whatever reasons from Africa, were part of that African Blood Brotherhood group. And I'm saying this to say there was never a moment in Black history in the United States where there was no resistance and particularly no clandestine organization fighting for the freedom of Black people.
Where does the Deacons of Defense fit in there?
Well, the Deacons, the Deacons for Defense is part of that continuum.
Okay.
They come out of they come out of a combination of the Korean War, World War II, and the Vietnam War. Those brothers, mainly brothers, came together in the South, right? Because they saw the violence, the daily violence that was coming upon the civil rights activists, right? Who were supposedly nonviolent. That's a whole nother story. They weren't. We know that Martin Luther King had a piece on his bedside, right? But they weren't. But they felt that as a body of veterans from various wars, they had the ability to be the security for these civil rights organizations and these leaders. And so they came together quietly, initially out of Louisiana, Mississippi, and said, you know, we're going to be behind the scenes. We're not going to be out front, you know, present and so forth. We're going to be behind the scenes, and, you know, we will tell the leaders that we're there, and, you know, we got your back. And so the Deacons for years in the South were there as bodyguards, if you will.
Right. Sam, okay, we'll put that other chat back up where someone asked about the deacons of defense that you took down right before this. There was another question. Can you talk about the deacons of self-defense and justice in Jonesboro, Louise? Don't forget Anna. You know anything about that, sir?
Anna, I don't know who
Okay.
referencing Anna. No.
Okay. All right.
The last comment, Gabriel, that came up. Was it rare for these clandestine groups to form some form of political ideology, such as the African Blood Brotherhood having a socialist Pan-African foundation?
Oh no, it was not rare. It was essential. It was essential to their development. And many of the members of the African Blood Brotherhood joined United Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey movement. You know, many of the early Black communists joined the Garvey movement also, right? Mm-hmm. So no, the political ideology was key. It wasn't Black rage unfettered. It was Black rage controlled and developed through an ideological development. You know.
Mm-hmm. You know, I want to also go back to when you mentioned Colimbo, and I think it was Colimbo de Palmeiras.
Yes,
and
Palmeiras.
Didn't they set up maroons similar to Nanny?
Absolutely, yes. The towns that they set up throughout Brazil in the 1700s, 1800s, and were key in helping to liberate other enslaved Africans from plantations and so forth. It was very, 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 very key. I think it was in terms of the Americas, the most developed free Black communities. Right? We had in the U.S. we had a few, but the dynamics was such that it couldn't sustain itself unless you were embraced by the indigenous population, right?
Yeah.
And the most developed one was the Seminoles.
Oh yes.
And the fascinating thing about the Seminoles is that the term Seminole is a European term. When the Spanish and the British confronted this unified front of Africans and indigenous people, you know, they were trying to say, what are you? You know, who are you? And there was one brother who spoke sort of Spanish, and he was saying cimarron. Right? But the way he was saying it was Seminole.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what caught on, and the rest is history.
Wow. Yes.
Because there's a very, very rich, deep interaction between people of African descent and the people of Native American descent in Florida and Southern Georgia. You know, where they dominated, right, in that whole area. So that's how we come up. You know, sometimes we don't realize that certain words are not original words out of English, but are twisted and evolved and so forth. Yeah.
Well, someone's asking where else can they find some more of your work, so we're gonna let you definitely do that. I want to bring us pivot to New York. Kay, we'll put that New York slide up now because I want Dr. Sam Anderson to respond to some of that. The New York slide that I told you we would get to toward the end of the program.
Yeah.
You see that one, Cairo? Anyway, you know, in 1712, they had a rebellion in New York,
New York
as you know. And as a matter of fact, New York City was the second largest slaveholding city in the nation, second only to Charleston, South Carolina. That's the basis on which I wrote my reparations bill for the state.
Right.
And in 1712, when they rose up like that, they had to rise up again and again. And then they had this, remember, they had this gradual emancipation in 1790.
27.
Right. So eventually, it was the blacks that burnt down the governor's mansion, and they were killing whites. And so the white community said, you better free these folk because they're taking it out on us, and you're the ones making all this money off of slavery. So while slavery was abolished in 1827 in New York City, it wasn't that some peaceful abolitionists did this. These were uprisings,
right,
that took care of business. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. There's a book. I'm trying to remember the author's name. Let me get his name. A Covenant of Color.
Covenant of Color.
Race and Social Power in Brooklyn by Craig Wilder.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It's a very important book. Okay. Because there's a number of factors about New York City that's absolutely history. Black history in New York City is absolutely fascinating. The Dutch had enslaved Africans, right? And they came in the 1600s and they created this place called New Amsterdam.
Correct.
And they had enslaved Africans, but the Dutch had a different. Their relationship with chattel slavery was slightly different. They were more indentured servitude kind of thing than chattel slavery. So when a brother or sister were worked enough and got enough to money to be manumitted, they did that. And so in New York City, for example, where Cooper Union is, that was black folks' land. Well, Cooper Union in that area, where the on the west side, where the immigration place is, on the lower west side, that was black folks' land. Rosemary and I, we did research in the old archives, the maps of the old New York City done in Dutch, and in that you see owned by Angola, owned by Congo, that kind of thing, and it's like, wow. So what happened was when the British came and said, we ain't having this, y'all are re-enslaved. They snatched the land, re-enslaved everybody. That meant on that level that there was resistance happening automatically. How I am a free person, and you're going to tell me that you're going to take my land and enslave me? No, right? So there was pushback. There was fight back on that, and that was whenever they did that was 1640 or something, 42 or something like that, when the British came. And all those years, 1642 to the 1770s, all those years, there was this resistance, this fight, this pushback by people of African descent. Even when the British brought in the enslaved Africans, like you said, being one of the centerpieces of enslavement in the colonies at that time. You had this kernel of resistance, and reluctantly the British had also free blacks in that period, right? And the tavern, the tavern where
Francis Tavern.
Francis Tavern, right? Francis tavern was black owned.
That's right.
That was the basis for the American Revolution. The other contradiction was the British said at that same time, look, black folk, you know, if you want to be free, you come to New York and we'll set you free. Right. And there's a fascinating novel called The Book of Negroes that also was turned into a film that was very, very, very well produced, both of them. Right. That laid that whole thing out. So New York City was a centerpiece of black resistance. The other factor was Brooklyn, right, which was Dutch. That's where the name Brooklyn comes from, Dutch. It was also the harbor in which sugar came, right? And sugar was also processed in Brooklyn in what we now call Williamsburg, right? And in that area. Fascinating. The sailors on those ships that came from the Caribbean, many of them were black and enslaved. They jumped ship, literally jumped ship, and disappeared into the free black community in Brooklyn, right? And eventually, many of them found their way to Weeksville, which was a larger, in the 1700s and late 1700s, 1800s. The Underground Railroad coming into New York,
right,
came through Manhattan and Brooklyn.
That's right.
Right. And the one thing we discovered several years ago was a group, Daughters of the Dust, Daughters of the Tent. Daughters of the Tent. Have you heard of them?
Daughters of what?
The Tent.
In Brooklyn. Daughters of the Tent. It was a semi-secret organization of black women who came together during the Underground Railroad movement to support sisters who came through the Underground Railroad, dealing with all the sisterly issues or the issues of the children and so forth in Brooklyn.
So I believe you're talking about the tent, United Order of Tents, and the J.R. Giddings and Jolliffe Union is one of those members of that tent organization. And also, as you're talking about the Underground Railroad and those stops, the homes down on Bridge Street, Hill Street, all of those were a part of that. And many of them have connections, underground tunnels that were connected.
Exactly.
And the church on Lafayette Street talks about the sections that they have there for that. So it's a great story, great information, and exciting.
Yeah. And we have just touched the tip of the iceberg of black resistance in the history. Yes, absolutely.
Well, man, unfortunately, we've run out of time. This was Sam, you were great, man. You're a great storyteller, you're a great historian, and you're a great activist. So we got to have you come back for more. This has been let them know what kind of books or any information they want. More information on you. How can they get some of the stuff that you published?
A lot of stuff is now out of print. I did a lot of stuff with Black Scholar, and I'm featured in a number of different anthologies. The late brother Woody King. I was with him with an anthology that put together and called Black Spirits, and also read poetry on at the Apollo that he organized, and so it's just a lot of stuff. And then unfortunately, there's a 2-volume work. Unfortunately for those who speak English, there's a 2-volume work that I worked with a French physicist on science and technology. The Third World confronts science and technology. We did this back in the 70s, and where we showed that the foundation of science and technology comes out of Africa, Asia, Latin America.
Well, you got the same man said, Zaid Muhammad said, I got on a little late, but I see Dr. Sam Anderson killing it. Thank you, brother.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
So at one point we could, I would like to talk about math, science, and Black folk historically and present. I have a slogan that is visual. AI, all capital I's, and the greater than symbol, lowercase AI. African intelligence is greater than artificial intelligence. We'd like to talk about that in this period.
Back on that. Wasn't Bob Moses into math?
Yes. Brother Bob Moses, I was snickered. We were good comrades. He created the Algebra Project.
Right.
And we introduced, long story short, we introduced it in New York City. It was so successful that it had to be killed.
That's right. That's what they do.
That's what they do.
Right. Yeah. And that's a whole nother story. It was absolutely, we brought the largest number of Black and brown students and parents to the Museum of Natural History. Not once, but twice.
Wow. Well, Dr. Sam Anderson, we want to thank you. Unless you wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is there a contact that you want to share with our viewers if they want to get in touch with you?
Very simply, Black Educator at mac.com.
Okay.
That's
Black Educator
at mac.com.
Thank you so much. And we also want to have you come back again, and we also want to let people know that Seneca Village in the heart of New York City was Black owned property, churches, schools, homes, and the city took it over by eminent domain, and it is now known as Central Park.
Right. Bum rushed it. Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you. We want to thank you all for tuning in. And as we say each and every week, the truth shall set you free, and power is the great equalizer. Black power.
Black power. 24/7, 365.
That's
there you
right.
go.